Hi, I'm George Hussey from Automobile Atlanta, and today we're going to review a pretty rare car, a factory prototype called a 916. As you can see here, sort of looks like a 914, but when I tell you about it, you'll understand that it is different. The 916 was a car that was going to be the new Porsche supercar for 1972, but it failed, and Porsche never made it, and they were smart never to make it, because back then, even though they had the 914 four-cylinder that was wildly popular, it wasn't really received well by the Porsche crowd. They thought they were Porsche wannabes or Volkswagen people or whatever. And they had this car that was actually, they designated the new supercar for 1972, like I said, but how in the world could they sell a Volkswagen Porsche for more, and it was going to be more money back then, than their top-of-the-line 911S, even though it was faster and handled better and was actually more luxurious. After only making 11 prototypes before they knew it, they had to discontinue it, or they would have really suffered. So we have 11 factory prototypes only, and then out of the 11 prototypes, which were all European, one came to the United States and was DOT certified. And that one is this 916 right here that actually was sent to Brumos in Jacksonville to study putting air conditioning on it, because a car that was going to be this expensive needed air conditioning. So Brumos put the air conditioning on it, which worked quite well. Didn't do a great job putting it on, had to actually intrude upon the rear firewall, but they had the air conditioning on there, and then the project was dropped. The car here that we're talking about actually was on the cover of the '72 Road and Track magazine with the caption, "One of a kind for America," and this is Peter Gregg behind the wheel driving it. So we were able to acquire this car because we were writing an article on the 916s and where they were, and I happened to call William Hall, which was the father of Peter Gregg's best friend, and he had had it for a while, and he said, well, I said, Mr. Hall, if you ever want to sell the car, and he said, well, George, and then when he said that, I thought, oh my, I don't have the money, I shouldn't have opened my damn mouth. But he made it affordable for us, and I made payments, and I took delivery in 1990, and I drove it up from Jacksonville. It was a great trip. I stayed at the Ritz-Carlton and the premier room there, and just had a wonderful time with my new 916. So we look at this car, and it has had so many clones done over the years. People made the 916 bumpers, they made the flared rocker panels, made the flared fenders. In fact, we even made steel flared fenders for GT conversion, and they had clones out there, clones and clones and clones and more clones. This one is the original, and since it's a prototype, it has some prototype features that we're going to discuss. The first thing is that because they planned this car to be the new supercar, and they were going to race it widely because it handled so well. They won Le Mans first, second, and third back in 1970 in their class, the GTs. This car has a welded-on steel roof, which sort of takes away some of the joy of the open-air feeling of the 914, but it makes the car so rigid that it handles incredibly, incredibly well, beyond belief. If you put this car right now up against a 911S of the same vintage, 1972, or even a Carrera, it would outdistance it around the track in no time at all. It's that good. The welded-in steel roof was accompanied by a chassis stiffening kit, which stiffened the typical flex from virtually the taillight all the way to the jack post. These were notorious for that, and since a 2.4 mechanically injected S engine was fitted, it really needed it. It's 190 horsepower, which with a 2,100-pound car, it, for the era, really gets up and goes. The bumpers which are very aerodynamic, actually were designed in anticipation of bumper standards, which first came out in 1973. They had to have a little bit of flex in them. This would have been, much like the 75, 76 914s, it would have been polyurethane with bumper shocks that were put on it. But since this was a prototype, these are fiberglass. And that means that if this car ever comes in contact with anything, it'll shatter the fiberglass and go right into the front panel. But again, it's a prototype, so it shows us what the car is all about, but it's not really that functional for a daily driver. The designation for USA meant that they had to put side marker assemblies on this car. The European cars did not. And because of the flare, they had to relocate these forward and down a little bit. So you can see that if in comparison to any other 914, these side markers are lower. USA tail lights, turn signals, of course, USA 45 watt, 35 watt driving lights, and the front oil cooler, which is right here. With the 2.4, you can probably, in a 6 conversion, you can probably get away without doing a front oil cooler. 2.7 certainly. 2.4 you can almost get away without doing it, but this car was set up for racing, and they were going to make so many of these, and I'm sure, just like the 914-6, people would have taken them and converted them and made them racing cars because they would have done so well. A fun feature of this car is the antenna in the windshield. This was a fad that even to this day is still used, but putting an antenna in a windshield on a 1 in 11 car, we hope this windshield never cracks. It would probably cost us 10 grand to have a glass company duplicate this windshield. The car had 7-inch alloy wheels, stock all the way around, and the high-performance 185 70-15 Michelin tires. I think they're XZX or something like that. I can't remember. This was supposed to be a luxury car as well, so you can see that they carpeted the whole front trunk, not over the gas tank. That some people think that they put a cover over the gas tank. No, did not. But the whole trunk was carpeted, and then Brumos, when they installed the air conditioning, put the condenser assembly right behind the oil cooler. So you can imagine the air coming in, going through the hot oil cooler, and then back into the air conditioning. So we wonder how well that's going to air condition the car. But it fits in there fairly well, and no spare. Probably throw a space saver in there or a regular spare, but then you have no trunk room. Or put the spare in the back trunk, which I'll show you next. So pretty luxurious car, but yet quite stock. There's no extra gallon fuel tank in here like some of the GTs have, and nothing different. Headlight motors are not different. They didn't even paint over the shock towers like they did with the 914 6-cylinders. These 916s, the 11 of them, were all 914, except for the very first, and I'll tell you about that in a moment. These cars were all 4-cylinder white 914s. 10 of the 916s, number 2 through the last of the 11, were 914 4-cylinders, all light ivory, that were color changed and made into 916s at the racing shop. The very, very first 916, which was the prototype of the prototype, was an actual 914-6, a 1971 model, that was converted into a 916 at the factory racing shop. These two were built at the factory racing shop, but they were a bit more refined than the very first one. We know about the very first one that had the 914-6 serial number, and again, the first one was an actual 914-6 converted. The other 10 were 914 4-cylinders that were converted into 6-cylinder 916s. But the very, very first one we actually had in our shop, and it had had a very, very hard life, and we put it back together in our shop at one time. They called that one Brutus. So the rear trunk also was carpeted with room to bolt the spare in here, and obviously you couldn't put the hard top in here, so it didn't have any holders for the top, either front nor rear, of course. And then the rear panel, this factory script said, obviously 916 Porsche, but Porsche put actually the only Porsche that had a hood badge, they put a hood badge on this car, but it wasn't a hood, it was on the back panel. And they took a 914.6 VW Porsche emblem and cut it and butted the two together. They're actually loose if you push it a little bit to make the 916 emblem out of that, because again, prototype, they didn't have the facility to make a genuine 916 emblem. The car, besides the chassis stiffening kit mentioned earlier, had fiberglass rockers, and they weren't thinking much when they made these. They just threw them on there after they put the flares on, so you can see they don't fit very well. And these are actual factory rockers. So the one here sticks back and the other one sticks forward, but that's what you get with a prototype, not anything that's precise, unlike the production models they would have had. The engine grill is double grilled with what we call German chicken wire. It doesn't match the factory side grills like on all the produced cars, but it allows more cooling air to get to the engine. And it's very flimsy, as you can see right here, and quite crude, really. We make a duplicate of this. In ours, we try to make just like this with the black screws in here, but it's nothing that you want to look at and say, oh, this is so precisely done. It's not. They overlap the German chicken wire right here, and you can catch your finger on it. Then you can see the air conditioning compressor right here, which is a big York unit that they took directly from a 911, and they mounted it exactly like the 911 York on the cars, but it stuck too far forward for the car to fit, the air conditioning compressor to fit in, so they actually had to wallow out the rear back pad to make this thing clear. So this is not a car that some 6'4" guy could get in. The seat won't go back all the way because of the bulge for the air conditioning. Sort of stupid, but that's the only thing they could do. I think in the future, if they kept making this car, they would have designed another more efficient, smaller air conditioning compressor for this. 2.4 S engine, mechanical fuel injection, 190 horsepower for this would really get up and go. And then also it had a 915 transmission, which was pretty heavy shifting like all the 915s are, but they converted it to shift from the tail rather than from the front like the 911s do, because of course they turned it back around. And it has a special speedo angle drive that goes to the front. Impossible to duplicate one-off parts only along with the shift linkage. We would hate to ever lose a part for this car because we would never find a replacement. Also, because these cars were prototypes, the fit and finish wasn't really to a high standard. For example, since this car was white changed to silver, they didn't paint the engine compartment silver. They just took a black spray bomb and blacked the whole thing out. And the 6 oil lines were hastily plumbed for the oil cooler through what would have been the 4-cylinder engine lid drain tube, and the mechanical injection fuel filter assembly was hastily stuck over here where the 914 pressure sensor would be. I am sure, again, like I said, this car would have been much more refined once they had made the cars down the assembly line. And again, the compressor would have been smaller and more incorporated, because 6'4" guys wouldn't stand and not be able to put the seat back. But everybody on a car this expensive would have wanted air conditioning. And the engine is so light it's a little hard to close. The rear has vented rear disc brakes with special calipers, very similar to a Ferrari 308 with big pads. And like I said, it was 7-inch wheels and the high-speed Michelin 185/70 tires. Funny, they put a piece of chrome down here even though there was no side vinyl, because when they put the side vinyl on most of the Appearance Group 914s, they finished it off with this piece of chrome. Well, this car has no side vinyl, but yet it's got the chrome, so we wonder why. We think that they would have ordered offered a vinyl top option for this car if they had produced it. So complete vinyl top. The 73 914s, the first 1,000 of them, actually had, the 4 cylinders had vinyl around the windshield frame. So you can imagine the 916 having a full vinyl top. That would also clean up some of the silver. This car just has way too much silver on it. So in my opinion, it's certainly not the most attractive 914 I've ever seen. So if we look at the interior now, we first can see two things that stand out. We have the seat belt, 1970, although this is a 72 by the ID number. The ID number is 914243, or 914223. It's a 916 serial number, special serial number, so you know it's not a conversion. And then the DOT sticker in the door jamb designating it a 916. These cars, even though they were 72s, didn't have the side vents that all 72s had. So these bodies were actually 70, 71 bodies that they converted, and they tagged as a 72 model, as you can see on the number, like I said. The interior had a heavily leather-covered dash, and you can imagine the time that it took to stitch this dash and the bottom dash, and leather across the dash fascia, and leather pockets and leather door panels. I'd hate this car to be in Arizona. It would be a mess. We've carefully protected it. You can see the leather stitching around the door pull and the little flap for the map pocket. Originally, when this car came to the port, it had paisley interior, like it shows in the Road and Track article, but Peter Gregg didn't like the paisley type interior. It looked like somebody was high on something and had the floating things in front of their eyes. So he had Tony Lapine send him this Porsche cloth, and they recovered the interior with the Porsche cloth, which in my opinion is extremely attractive. And actually the blue paisley we bought some, but we're not going to recover the interior because this was Peter Gregg's choice. It has the 911 wool carpeting and leather covered steering wheel. They actually sprayed this from black to gray, and then it's got a leather covered center cushion on a leather covered plastic tray. They took a 914 plastic tray and covered it with leather, and then the lever shift knob, which covers the base of the shifter, unlike the 914s and the 6s that had the carpeting covering the base of the shifter. So this is a little bit different right there. You can see this is a fun item. When they routed these oil lines, they wanted to get a straight shot to the front, so that meant the oil lines had to come in here, go into the car, go around the left driver to the front. So they had to make a special fiberglass carpeted cover to cover the oil lines, so there's less room in here. So you can imagine your left foot, less room, the back, less room, and I'll show you this. I'll pull the seat forward. You can see the bulge. You can see the bulge behind the driver's seat there. Not very well done. And try to put the seat back all the way. Like we said, virtually an impossibility. It has a nicely upholstered headliner in here. I think that's vinyl. And because they put air conditioning in this, the so-called center console couldn't be put in there with the 2 gauges, so instead they hung them on a little bracket. Most of the all the other 916s have a little center deposit box with the gauges on them. And that's how they got the 5 gauges on the 6 for the oil tank and the oil pressure. You can see the gauges there. This was also fitted with a Becker cassette radio, which works pretty well. It's a very high-line radio they usually put in Mercedes. So again, pretty high-line luxury ride they did this. And it had to be that way for, again, what they were going to sell it for. The trim, same as the 914-6. The seat belts, non-retractable. Because this is a 70-71 body, there was no way to put a retractable seat belt in here. I think the production cars, well, I know the production cars would have been the 72 and up bodies, which would have allowed for the retractable seat belts and the extra ventilation right here. But again, prototype, we're just going to grab some cars off the line. We're going to make the prototype, and that's going to be it. Early model window mechanisms, these would have changed also. So in general, sort of a crude car, but we're happy to have it. And it remains in our collection. It's been there since 1990, and it's not going to go anywhere. Thank you for listening.
Baby girl, you are so pretty, 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 pretty. Baby girl, you are so pretty, 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 pretty. Females made you just to trick me, trick me, trick me, trick me. 'Cause baby girl, you are so easily pretty. The only reason that I can do tonight is 'cause I know you were invited. The only reason that this dress is skin tight is 'cause I thought that you would like it. I'm only gone for the secret outside because I want you to